Like we have everybody currently in who's here. I want to say hi and welcome. This is a breakout session for the Hancock Symposium. This is Alexis Lowery. She is doing a presentation called Building Hope and Building Homes. My name is Virginia Mohammed. I am the program coordinator for our Every Blue Jay program here at Westminster. We work specifically with dating violence, sexual and domestic violence, and stalking on campus. So something I just kind of wanted to touch base about before we start, please be sure that you have your mics on mute and that you have your cameras off right now. There will be an opportunity later to ask questions, but first Alexis is just going to talk to us initially. Also, if there's something that you need, please feel free to put something in the chat and we can address that. And then also just something kind of particular to this session is Alexis is going to be talking about things that may have occurred in your life or in the life that people you love, and to please feel free to take care of yourself, identify if maybe something that you're hearing is having an effect on you, and please, just be good to yourself, and if you need any kind of help or assistance, we will be sure to help you with that. So that being said, I'm going to throw it over to April to introduce Alexis.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is April Sita. I'm a junior here at Westminster, and I am an English major, so my introduction that I wrote is a little poetic, so bear with me. I'm just really passionate about who Alexis is as a person and her cause, because we're good friends, and yeah. Anyway, okay. I am a firm believer in the saying, your struggles don't define you. There are many people who use the bad things in their life that happen to justify being rude, selfish, and disrespectful to others. They think that if they have suffered, why shouldn't everyone else? Life is tough, right? They believe that suffering builds character, and everyone should do it. There is nothing you can go through that is ever worse than what they have or are suffering. Your life can never be bad because, in their eyes, theirs is much, much worse. Then there are people who have suffered and gone through hell and know what it feels like to despair, and they don't want anyone else to feel that way. These people are a light through whatever darkness you have, and are compassionate and kind whenever you are in need. They never turn suffering into a competition. They know that everything is relative, and the end of the world may not look the same for everyone. The most ironic part about this dichotomy of these two people is that the ones who have suffered the most tragic events are usually the latter. This is what you are about to hear, a story of tragedy and loss that cannot be described as anything less. The person you are speaking to today has every right to be as bitter and angry at the world as she would like, but this is not and never has been the case. Alexis and I met in kindergarten when she was in kindergarten and I was in first grade, but we really became close when we both joined the dance team at our high school. I knew she was a nice girl, but what I didn't know is that Lexi had the most beautiful, bright soul I have ever met. All the positive characteristics I have described above, she has times 100. She is truly a person who is pure of heart and wants nothing more out of life than to help others. As long as I can remember, she has been a powerful voice for women and children who have been abused. I know that she will never stop her fight and continue to be the most incredible, kind, compassionate, strong, badass woman I know. I hope you are as excited as I am to see her kindness and light come through as she speaks about her passion. But more importantly, I can't wait for you to hear her speak about the amazing organization she and so many people have worked tirelessly to create, all to help the people around them. Thank you.
Thank you, April. That was the best introduction I think I've ever gotten. Thank you so much, April. Like she said, my name is Alexis. I am currently a junior in college as well. I go to Webster in St. Louis, and I am part of a really amazing project called Mary's House of Hope. So to give a little background, about 10 years ago when I was 9, doing typical, 9-year-old things, riding bikes, playing with your friends, trying to be in the spelling bee, my mom was killed by my stepdad. So they had been in a relationship since 2007. And they had gotten together, and it was a little bit chaotic, but it wasn't anything too concerning, which is typically how domestic violence starts. So he was a little crankier than most people are. When he drank, he became belligerent, he was demeaning, but they were things that you could dismiss away with, well, he had a bad day at work, or he just drank a little too much, and they weren't things that anyone would off the bat say, uh-oh, we're going to have problems. So on August 3rd of 2010, he went up to her workplace at Mercy Hospital, and he waited for her to exit the building, and he attacked her while she was walking to her car. So 10 years ago, I lost my mom, I lost a best friend, and I really lost what my world revolved around. So on that day, I was at the babysitter's, which is next door to my house, and we were playing and we were having a good time being kids, and I had asked to stay later, and next thing you know, I was there all night until about 9 or 10 o'clock. And my dad and my stepmom, who I'm very grateful to have, came, they picked me up, they took me home. And what I didn't know was that cops were at my house, there was crime scene tape up, and the rest of my family were saying, where's Mary at? Where's Lexi's mom at? No one's heard from her, we can't find her. And so once the pieces were put together with my county's cops and the St. Louis County cops up at Mercy, they had found her outside of work. So to put all that into perspective, being 9 was a very, very big task. And it was something that children definitely aren't ready to hear, let alone the adults in my family weren't ready to hear. And the fact that we felt like we missed so many signs, even though we were aware of them and we talked about them, but there was still no relief and there was nothing we could really do other than say, hey, look, this is concerning. So when the relationship started, the concern was, a bad attitude, a bad anger problem, things like that. And so the longer they were together, the more things intensified, the more things increased. So we went from just verbal name calling, being degrading, screaming, to physical things. And so I didn't see all the physical abuse happen, but there would be bruises on my mom, and I would ask questions, and it was, well, I had to lift someone at work at the hospital so they could be answered away. So as these things continued to happen, I became more and more curious as to what was going on. And so it finally all came to a head a month before she passed away. And we were at my home, and my mom was there and I was there, and he had come back after she had asked him to leave. She had a restraining order to get something for work that he had left there. And so we were sitting there, and that was the first time, as a child, that I saw manipulation happening in front of me. And he, I'm sorry, that'll never happen again. I just love you so much. And so words that I was taught were sacred and were meant out of love suddenly were twisted into something that weren't out of love, and they were out of malice intent, and they were out of fear of losing her. And he had made the comment, if I can't have her, no one can. And so we see that a lot in domestic violence. And so in the chaos and the criminality of all these things, we forget that these victims are people and that they have lives and they have families. And we get so wrapped up in, what the abuser did and jail time and trials and things like that, which are all important. But the main thing is, my mom was a person. She was a radiologist technician. She, owned the home we live in. She went to school to have that job that she loved. She had the worst dance moves. I have never seen anyone dance so badly. Maybe some of you can relate to that. I know it was passed down to me. She could only cook spaghetti. Cooking didn't get passed down to me either. I don't know how to cook. She definitely didn't know how. But she loved to laugh, and her smile lit up the room, and she, we'd joke around, and it was typical mom and daughter things when you are a kid. And so she was all the bright things in my life, and she was someone who I really looked up to as a role model and as an example, because she was everything I wanted to be. Like most young girls, I really looked up to all the things that she was. I looked at, her drive, her charisma, her compassion, and she really had a heart for people, and she really cared about people. And I think that's where I get those characteristics about myself. And so when we talk about these things, and when we do get the chance to bring light to what these victims look like, we see that there is no standard victim of domestic violence. There is no perfect person that fits this mold, because domestic violence can hit anyone. It comes in every community. It comes in every shape, form, race. And we see that the people that are affected by these aren't just news stories that you watch at 10 o'clock at night, but these are real families going through these traumas. And so a lot of times when we do see things on the news, our first response is, wow, this is terrible. And it is terrible. But then questions and comments start to come as, why did she stay? Why didn't he or she just leave? What took so long? And the problem is that narrative creates a story of victim blaming and victim shaming. And once that is said, you can't take that back. And so whoever is around you when you say those things, now they know they can't trust you. And so when you say things like that, and obviously not you guys, but people in general, they are quick to ask questions, pointed at the victim instead of why is the abuser being abusive. And it just really downplays the situation, and it doesn't allow victims a safe spot to find help. And a lot of times why victims stay is not clear. And a lot of people, it's different things. Some people, have kids and they want to make things work because they want kids to grow up in a 2-parent household. Some people, it's financial. Some people, it's they want to help the other person. And there's all these reasons. And regardless of the reason someone chooses to stay, that is not the question we should be asking. And along with that, a lot of times I feel like, I'm justifying why my mom didn't deserve abuse or deserve to pass in such a way, when in all reality, there is no reason for anyone to suffer that kind of tremendous loss of their life, especially at the hands of someone who said to love them. And so there's no justification that should ever have to be had by a victim for why they stayed or why it took longer or anything of that nature, because being able to just talk about it and be open and have people in your community that, know what this is very important. And having this open dialogue really just reminds people that, these victims are just like you and me. They have favorite colors. They have Friday night plans and things of that nature. And so this snapshot of what domestic violence is in my own life really opens the door to what it is, nationally and in our community as well. And when we, look up the term, it just, it's abuse against a spouse or an intimate partner in the home. But the National Coalition describes it as willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, or any other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern. And that is really more fitting because domestic violence and sexual assault is it's about power and control. It has nothing to do with the other person. It only has to do with the abuser to be able to maintain that control. And so that is where we see things start in small manners and they end up in much larger aspects. And so there's plenty of different types of domestic violence, and physical is being the main one we often hear about. And that's, hitting, slapping, choking, things of that nature. And that's what we see on the news a lot because it can be measured by how severe the victim is injured. What we don't hear about as much is emotional abuse. So that is, gaslighting, which is making the other person feel like they're crazy, or manipulation, being degrading, things of that nature, because that can't be measured on a scale like physical abuse can. And so reporting that and being open about that is a lot harder sometimes for victims, as well as, financial abuse and, being locked out of accounts, not knowing where money's going, and sexual abuse. So just as sexual assaults happen, they can also happen in domestic violence cases, and that is just that lack of consent, being forced to do things. And then stalking is another big thing that occurs in domestic violence, and that definitely happened in my mom's case, to where once she said she was done and we're not doing this anymore, and he couldn't handle it. So he knew where she was. She had people looking where, she was going through her phone, trying to tap into that and things of that nature. And so even though stalking has taken kind of a technological spin on it, it's still just as concerning. And so those 5 types of domestic violence are definitely what we see the most often. A lot of the times they encompass each other and they're multi-layer in every situation, and every relationship is different. So there is no pinpoint case that shows us, this is what domestic violence is and this is what we can do as advocates, because there are so different. And so each person that ever confides in you or comes to you should be able to say, you're going to be helpful, you're going to be objective, and the way to do that is to be knowledgeable about it. And so when we talked about who those people are who are going to come to you, statistically 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will go through a domestic violence situation, especially pertaining to physical abuse. We see that it spans across all races and all ages. So this can happen with high school kids and dating violence and college kids, and the most at-risk age is 18 to 24 for women specifically. And so we see that it spans over all types of people. There is no discrimination in terms of socioeconomics. This happens to rich people, this happens to poor people, this happens to your blue collar, white collar, middle class. There is no standard person. And so we see sometimes in the news judges or lawyers or police officers or McDonald's workers or any type of, an office worker, a bank teller, all these people who are involved in domestic violence, they don't have a certain background, they don't have a certain career. And that's what makes domestic violence such an epidemic, is that there is no discrimination amongst people. It can happen to anyone at any age, at any race, at any socioeconomic class. And so just as we sometimes assume that it happens in the marriage between a man and woman, it also affects the LGBTQ community. And so that's another thing that resources are continuing to come more and more out about, is that what was first categorized as just your husband or wife in that marriage, we see now there are also the same issues that plague that community as well. So when we talk about these victims, it's important that that stigma of weakness that a lot of people connect to it is abandoned. Just because someone doesn't choose to report their abuse doesn't mean they're weak or that they don't want to. There can definitely be extenuating circumstances that change the way they feel about reporting. And especially if they've had a bad experience, it's going to be really hard for them to feel like they can confide in someone again. And so a lot of times on the news, we see people that are in the professional light or that are famous or that we know, they're in the news for being abusers. And so victims that are just everyday people find it really hard to come forward when we see that these famous people on the news aren't being convicted and aren't being dealt with in the way that I as an advocate think they should be. And so if people that are higher up in society aren't facing the consequences, that makes it really hard for a victim to think that their abuser could as well. And so when we talk about people leaving an abusive relationship, it's really important to know that leaving is the most dangerous time. And it certainly was for my mom. And that's when, everything transpired. And so the aftermath of getting out of that relationship is you have to start feeling secure again somehow. And that's going to come through resources like therapy and finding a group that makes you feel safe and secure and taking whatever steps you need to feel safe and to feel comfortable where you were once at. And so however we can do that is what we're looking for. And we like to talk about a lot as bystander intervention. And so being that person that when you see something, say something. And, I encourage everyone to have the National Domestic Violence Hotline programmed into their phone. So if you see something, you can make that call. And the creation of our project was really based in the fact of education. And for people to know there are resources out there. At the time, my family and I didn't know that. We weren't aware that resources were available for people. And so my mom suffered a lot of things that I don't know about still, and that, we just don't know in general. And there were people out there that could have been a lot of help. And so we started Mary's House of Hope in 2011. And we were all sitting at my grandma's house. And one of my mom's high school friends said, listen, we want to do something. We can't just, let her pass and not do anything. And if you're in, we're in. And so we said, okay, let's plan this fundraiser and let's have awareness events. And so we started hosting trivia nights and family fun days and self-defense classes and plays and anything we could do just to push our story out there and say, listen, this happens in, our county, this happens in our nation, this happens globally. And so however we could reach people is what we did. And so as we continued to raise funds, we started getting our name out in the community, and we were asked to speak at high schools. I spoke at my high school a few times. We went to different area schools. We went to businesses and Rotary meetings and things of that nature, which really was able to project us on to where we are now. And so as we started to raise awareness, we started to raise these funds. And the question was, we're raising this money, and where do we put it? Do we put it for counseling? Do we send it to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence? Where are these funds the most helpful? And so we connected with the local shelter that is in our county, and we're like, okay, we'll go ahead and pass the money along to them. And so as we got to know them more and started working with them, we saw that there was this need for not only more housing, but for more advocacy in this area. And so we were turning away thousands of women a year on the fact that we don't have room at the shelter. And when, our group of Mary's House of Hope heard that, that was very disturbing to us as, surviving that as a child. How do we fix this? And so we partnered with the agency that the current shelter is under to become one with them and to really work with them, because as fighting the same mission, there was no point in fighting it separate when we could do this big thing together. And so we launched what's called a capital campaign in 2017 to build transitional housing. So what transitional housing is a woman would come to the current shelter that's opened. She would stay there for a period of time, and then once she was ready, would move into transitional housing. So our first transitional house is about to open, and what it looks like is this big building, and it has 4 apartments inside, and each apartment houses a different number of people, depending on women's children and however many rooms they need, just like a normal apartment complex would. So we broke ground in March of 2017. I'm very proud to say that we will be opening within the next month or so. So we are far on our way, and that's definitely due to the community support we've given and opportunities like this that really make people aware of what that mission is. And so as we work towards that, our main goal is to make sure that these victims turn into survivors, and that they go on in strength and in dignity, and they have this newfound hope that maybe they didn't have before. And so Mary's House of Hope was created on the basis of such a loss that was so detrimental to myself and to my family, but it has become a project that is so worthwhile and it is so needed in this community. And a lot of times when we talk about domestic violence, it's a very uncomfortable topic because no one wants to talk about things that really is kind of unknown. We don't really know why it happens. Obviously, abusers make decisions that harm people. We don't know how to stop it other than to educate and to provide housing and to provide advocacy and be a support system that maybe these people have never had. A lot of these women don't have everything due to their abuse. So a big abuser tactic is to isolate a victim. And so a lot of times we see victims come and they're like, I haven't talked to my family in so many years. But that's not always the case. Just as, my mom, we were very in touch with my family and things like that. And so my stepdad was able to continue the abuse even though we were seeing my family often. So as we created Mary's House of Hope and now have the building up and almost ready to go, my hope is that it not only helps continue to save women and children, but that it gets the word out that there is no perfect victim of domestic violence and that everyone you see could be going through something, and to make sure you're aware of those signs. So if you see someone that is more isolated than usual, obviously physical attributes are changing, and you're not talking to someone as much and you know that relationship isn't healthy, that is where I encourage you to step in. Going forward, being able to work with Mary's House of Hope has really been the brightest light of my whole life in my 20 years this far. And once you find a purpose and a passion, I just encourage you to go all in. And if you're going to bet on something that matters. And I never would have thought as a child that at 20 I would say, oh, I have this purpose and I know what my purpose is. But I do, and it's such a beautiful thing. And so as of currently, I am working at the current domestic violence shelter that we partnered with as a victim advocate. I've been doing that for about a year. And I have got to see the building of Mary's House of Hope being built on that same property. So what I learned first going through it personally, and then what I'm learning now as an advocate, is that, like I said before, no situation is the same. And everyone needs advocacy a little different. And the biggest takeaway is that you need to be that person that's there for people. And as someone who gets to advocate on behalf of these ladies, there is no greater job than this. And being able to know that all your efforts are so appreciated. Just coming here and listening is always wonderful. And a big thing that I've learned as well, just to help you as you go on to advocate, I hope, is that they will leave when they're ready, and to be a sounding board and to be supportive. And so working there has really fostered my love of advocacy and reinforced what I want in my future. And that is to give others this courage and this strength, and to make sure that I'm in the trenches with them and knowing that you're not going through this alone. I'm telling you this all as well. You're not alone. There are people here that are so happy to help and so honored to get to be a part of a mission like this. And that even though maybe we don't have all the answers, you have the support and we're with you all the way. And just to really show people that you are so worthy of healthy relationships, and there's nothing you could do or ever do that would warrant any type of abuse or maltreatment, and that you have such a beautiful soul and a power in you that is so deserving of love and of joy. And that being said, just know that the women that I have the opportunity to work with haven't always felt that, and they haven't been in those relationships. And so being able to be a voice for them is a really exciting part of my job. And it's also something that I want to continue forever. And I hope that that is something that you look into. And, as we continue with Mary's House of Hope, a lot of it is you never know what someone's going through. At different events and things, we see people come up and say, hey, I didn't think I was in a domestic violence relationship, but what you just described is what I'm living. And so knowing that if something I said here today is eye-opening or anything like that, that please feel free to reach out and know that even if you didn't think it was an abusive relationship, it's worth looking into, and that it is never, never the victim's fault, and it is always on the abuser of the bad actions they are taking, and that the abuse that is being handed down is not deserving in any situation. And so moving forward, we hope to do really big things, and we hope to change some laws and open eyes and make sure that victims are safe in the justice system. And as someone who has worked at law firms and has court shadowed, we see a lot of times that there's this disconnect, especially in the legal realm of victim advocacy. And so as we continue to work towards that and brainstorm, there's always new things on the horizon in working with domestic violence. And there's nothing that is more fulfilling than that. And you can never advocate too much for someone. And that is something I learned right when I started at the shelter, is that doing what you do and giving a voice to people who have felt like they haven't had one in a while is the most promising thing you'll ever do. And being able to change the way maybe people view abuse is definitely an eye-opening experience. And knowing that you can do this and you are, the future of movements like this. And this is something I'm honored to be a part of, and I'm honored to talk to you today about. And I will hand it back over to Virginia or April.
Yes, hi. Okay, can you hear me okay, Alexis?
Yes,
yeah, thank you so much for those thoughts and that information, particularly information about what to look for people who may be experiencing domestic or sexual violence. Something I was kind of hoping to have your thoughts on, and if you're okay, we'll go ahead and open up the question and answer section. So if you have a question for Alexis, feel free to go ahead and put it in chat. Since we are kind of a more intimate group, Alexis has said that she's comfortable with you just turning your mic off and speaking to her, so that's also something that you're welcome to do. But in terms of looking for indicators or signs of domestic violence, we know that that looks different from a mom with 2 kids or an elderly person living in a nursing home. And for the students that we serve here at Westminster, what is sort of unique to a college experience? What are things that we should look for in terms of college kids that might be involved in domestic violence?
Absolutely. So we use a lot when we talk to, I have this open dialogue with my friends a lot, making sure they're in healthy relationships as, myself or anyone else, is we use a lot of green and red flags. What are green flags in a relationship and what are some red flags? So just a couple that I am very passionate about and I like to talk about is if you are not hearing from your friend as much. Obviously in new relationships, that's a little bit normal, I would say. But if you're months in and they are kind of avoiding hanging out with you, there are some things you just feel like they're disconnected, that's something to be concerned of. And obviously if that's not domestic violence, something else might be going on. That's definitely worthy to look into. If you see a shift in personality, there's no one who knows your friends better than you do. So when you see that shift and you try to bring up, hey, I feel like something's a little off here, That's definitely a big indicator, but the most important thing I would say to look for is someone whose partner is controlling. And this can come in a lot of different aspects. A lot of, no, you're not going out with them. No, you're not going to text them. You're not going to be friends with them on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever platform you decide to use. And so having someone, and abuse comes from needing power and control and an insecurity on the abuser's end. So when they are trying to overtake the power and control in your own life, it's kind of when we see that shift start to happen. So definitely if you feel like your friend is being controlled is going to be a big indicator. And a lot of times people are like, well, what does that look like? And it comes in a lot of different forms. I would say obviously the phone is a big deal. We're always on our phones now. And so that's a big thing to look for is, are they monitoring that cell phone like it's their own? And also if we're talking manipulation wise is a big thing. And with abuse, a lot of it starts kind of minor, starts a little bit small. Normally people don't start off being physically abusive. It starts with how they talk to someone. So if you're out and about or at a party with your friends and the way their partner is talking to them is scary to you, that's when, if you see something, say something. And that conversation is typically very uncomfortable because no one wants to bring that up. And it's probably something to do in private, but to just know that someone is there to see that something is going on. So don't let it wait until you see marks or physical abuse to say something. If you think that you're seeing, your friend being talked down to by their partner, or they're always checking their phone, or they're obsessive about where they're going or what they're wearing, is definitely a big sign I'd look for, especially at this age.
Thank you. Those are all really, really good thoughts and advice. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question? I think Sydney has asked, do you ever see situations where there was mutual abuse or toxicity? How do people forgive themselves for being toxic in the past?
There are definitely cases, not as much as I've seen. And to be very honest, when both parties are abusive people, I have seen stories, I haven't seen it so much personally, and they will hit on each other and they will scream and degrade each other. I have not seen either party reach out for help. So when there's two very toxic people in a situation, typically they hone in on each other. And as to toxic people forgiving themselves, I don't know. There are definitely classes, a lot of batterers intervention programs for people who are abusers, and those kind of go through how to control your anger. But more than that, it gets down to, why are you abusive? And so a lot of times we see children that have witnessed domestic violence, that they either become abused in a relationship or they become the abusive partner. And so that's why we're really keen on education, is to make sure kids don't turn out like that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point, Alexis, and I'm sure you've seen this in your practice, that a lot of times in a situation with domestic violence, when people show up, when police show up, you're seeing two people who appear to be fighting each other. Mm-hmm. But what is really happening is the abuser is hurting the victim, and the victim might be trying to fight back. And so It appears to be a mutual fight, but essentially it's one person defending themselves from their abuser.
Absolutely. And so we've seen decently often in my year working in the shelter is when the police come and suddenly now the victim is trying to defend the abuser. And that is not, people always have a lot of judgment to pass on that. And, why would they do that? They call the cops, and all this. And it's not that they are defending them out of just nothingness. They're defending them because, here's the thing, if those cops leave, it's going to get worse. And so they're thinking, from what I've been told and what I've talked to with victims, they're thinking, when that cop leaves, I'm stuck with him or her. Because they don't always make arrests on those types of things. We hope they do. And a lot of times they do where I'm, in the county I live in. But depending on the information that cop receives, you have to do what is standard practice and what's procedure. So when that victim is defending the aggressor, the goal is not, well, that must not be what happened, someone's lying here, but it's what repercussions are going to be faced once that third party leaves.
Thank you. Yeah. April is asking, when you see one of your close friends going through abuse, what should you say? And then also, if you tell them that you're worried about their relationship and they don't think there is a problem, how do you help them?
So that's a good question. So the first part, let me say, is you can't make someone leave an abusive relationship. They have to leave when they are ready. While that is the most frustrating thing, and it is, because as someone on the outside, you're going, why don't you see this? This is black and white to me. This is so transparent. Sometimes, the baby bird syndrome kicks in. And my mom had a lot of that to where she just wanted so badly to help people. And that led to helping someone who was so abusive. And so when you see your friends going through something like that, I always recommend a private conversation. You never want to bring something like that up in a public setting to make anyone feel uncomfortable or embarrassed. Not that there's anything to be embarrassed about, but people often feel that way. And just saying, listen, I have some concerns based on what I've seen, and I just want to bring this attention because I love you, I care about you, and I want what's best for you. And so if they receive that well, that's great. Get them some resources. Let's get them out of that relationship. If they don't receive that so well, and a lot of people won't, then that is where you kind of take a step back and become kind of a background support. So at this point, you've expressed to them how you feel. It's up to them. Obviously, every once in a while to revisit is completely up to you and what you're comfortable with that friend. But it's now just you're waiting now till they're ready to go, until they see it. And then when they do, that's your time to shine of, let me get you resources. Let me connect you. How can I help you? And so while it's very difficult, we do see statistically, women specifically, when they leave a domestic violence relationship, they will return 7 times before completely being finished. So while that number seems astronomical to us, it's the facts, it's what happens, and what brings them back is this manipulation and control. So just being there and letting that friend know that you're here regardless of their decision, but if and when they choose to leave, as you hope they do, that you have resources for them.
Right. Does anybody else want to jump in before I ask another question? Okay. Could you kind of talk a little bit about safety planning? What is a safety plan? What are things that if you're involved in the situation you can do, or a friend or a family member, what can you do to help them?
Sure. So safety planning is a very big deal, and we often minimize it, and a lot of people don't. They're like, what is that thing that she's doing? So safety planning a lot is, if you are going to stay in this relationship, how do I stay safe? And just, reinforce the idea that abuse is never your fault. There's nothing you can do that warrants that. But if you know that your abuser or that partner is escalated at certain things, a getaway plan is what I refer to a lot. We need to make sure we're at places in the house that don't have sharp objects, that don't have something that can be grabbed and thrown, that we have access to car keys, and that we can get out of the garage and we can get in the car and we could drive off somewhere. And then when we talk about safety planning with the women at the shelter, the residents, it's a lot of, if you see them out in public, what do we do? Typically these abusers are aggressive. Obviously they don't really care. Typically most of them don't care about law enforcement involvement. If they have intent to do something terrible, they have no fear to do it. And so we really look at making sure, obviously, if someone has a restraining order, always have it on them, in the purse, in a book bag, in a shoe, wherever you need to put it. But to be able to get out of a situation and to make sure that if there's any way to de-escalate, it can be de-escalated in a safe way.
Thank you. I think that's so important to think about, that in a situation that feels chaotic and like you have no control over, there are things that you can do to feel more stable and feel like you have a control and you have a plan for things. So I think it's really great to talk about. If you don't mind speaking a little bit about your personal family experience,
Sure.
Do you mind kind of speaking about how your grandparents dealt with the death of your mother and sort of the fallout of that experience?
Yeah, so my parents have been divorced since I was a very small child, toddler age. So I have a wonderful dad and stepmom that I brag on any chance I get. And my mom's parents are just wonderful. And so the chaos of what was happening, combined with their suffering a loss, how do my parents raise a child who just suffered this loss? And how do, the head of our family continue forward? And so we saw from August 3rd of 2010, when my mom was killed, to November of 2011, when trial happened, a disconnect just for all of us. And it wasn't we love each other, we got all those things, but it was such that everyone just felt so empty. And how are we supposed to go on? And, we'll do it, and we can do it, with God and things like that is what we believed in. But where do we go from here? Things are changing. And so my grandparents, being my mom's parents, they really balanced each other, and they really worked hard at that relationship to keep them intact and to lead our family and, my aunts and uncles and all the family we had. And so when trial came around, they had to see a lot of things that no one would want to see of their family member, of, autopsy reports and crime scene photos and things like that. And they had to face, the man that murdered my mom in court. And so doing all those things obviously takes great strength and courage, but it also took a lot out of them as people to be able to do those things and to make sure that justice was handed down correctly, and as it was, and we're very grateful. And to see my parents, at my mom's funeral and things like that, and to see that, they were hurting when I was hurting. And so to be able to say that, we're all great now, they're all involved in Mary's House of Hope, but in the same times, people grieve very differently, and there's no real right or wrong way to do it. And so some of my family, we like to talk about my mom a lot, and we do it often. Some of my family, we don't like to talk about it. We just don't talk about it. If we talk about it, we're going to cry, and they don't want to cry. And so I find it, for me, and I know my grandparents and my parents as well, we talk about it a lot. And we talk about, Mary House of Hope was a really healing thing for us. And being able to know that, we had justice in the courtroom was really healing for us. Knowing that 12 jurors and 12 of our peers saw that the injustice that we saw. And I think that really propelled healing and growth and comfort. Even though that wasn't bringing my mom back, it was the idea that he wasn't going to enjoy his life as if nothing happened.
Thank you. I think that's a really great insight into the personal part of this, because it's easy to get caught up in, the court system or the cops or and bringing it back to the reality of the lived experience, I think is really, really great. Andrea is asking, has your past experience while growing up influenced the way you build romantic relationships today? Are you comfortable to be in romantic relationships, or are you afraid that what happened to your mom might happen to you?
That's such a good question. It definitely changes the way I go about them. For a long time, I don't know if it was a fear that what would happen to my mom would happen to me, but knowing that 1 in 3 women, experience domestic violence, that's not a big number. And knowing that people can come off one way in the beginning and quickly change their tune was very concerning to me. Being that I've seen it happen, I know it's real. And so a lot of people kind of go through like, oh, this would never happen to me. And so once it does happen to you and it does personally affect you, it definitely changes the way I look at relationships. And a good tip I tell my friends, when you get into a relationship, that stuff is great, flowers, all that's wonderful, but who are they at the core of a person? How do they treat their family? How do they treat their friends? What do people say about their past? Have they been abusive in previous relationships? And really, I encourage people, especially the residents, when they leave the shelter, most of them will go on and they will get into other relationships once they've healed. And we've seen wonderful successes, and people are remarried, and it's wonderful. And we've also seen people enter into another domestic violence relationship. And so when I, go into a relationship, I'm very open, not as, I don't give the whole rundown like I did here today, but I'm very open with the fact that this is a cause I really champion for, and no disrespect will be tolerated whatsoever. And so being around me, and I try to bring them to charity events, and seeing that, listen, this is where I'm at with this. And if that's not something, if you're not healthy emotionally, that's not something I can be around, because I know this is a real thing and I'm not willing to subject myself to that in any kind of way.
Sydney is asking, what can be done when children are in bad situations and the parent won't or can't leave?
There's multiple answers to that. So in my situation, I was going back and forth between mom and dad's house. So I was there half the time, and I never said anything because I didn't know what would happen if I did. And so a lot of times children, when they speak out, that's the first time and the only time they're going to do it. So obviously believe them. If a child does come to you and say something, I have heard different advocates say to try and talk to the parent that is in, the victim position, or obviously DFS is a great resource to call. And while that's a little scary, being that that child could be stripped away, it's better for that child, in my opinion, to be in a safe area than to be in an unsafe home. And so if there is a child that someone knows in that situation and you feel comfortable and confident that the situation won't escalate if you pull the victim aside, that could be an idea to do. But I would definitely do a little research on DFS and different resources in your area. Call a domestic violence shelter, talk to an advocate about it before reaching out to that person, just because that could ignite that situation further. So my best advice would be to involve a larger agency like a shelter or local police or DFS or things like that for people to really assess if that child can even be in that home.
April is asking, how do you support people who were toxic in their past but have changed, especially when they believe they are still the abuser and they deserve to suffer abuse for their past actions? So I assume, April, you can let me know that if somebody has been abusive in their past, but they feel like that they have changed, how should we respond to that?
So, and people definitely can't change. I'm a very firm believer in, people can change, people can reinvent themselves, and you're never too far gone. Growth is always possible. And so that being said, when you turn from abuser to a healthy person, you can't expect the victim to say, oh, okay, this is fine. And so we're not looking for that. But in supporting those people, and I have come across a couple individuals who are like, listen, I was the problem. Where do I go from here? You have to first, show someone how to forgive themselves and say, listen, that's who I was. That's not who I am now. And being able to do that should hopefully grow something. And then that, listen, that's my past. This is my present. I'm just going to do better now. And so by no means should, someone who was an abuser now go get abused by someone if that's their, idea of recompensance or things like that. But knowing that healing is possible and probably forgiving themselves is going to be that first step.
Can you talk to the idea of minimization and the idea that there is this idea that we're raised with, that we see in the media, of what a domestic violence victim is? And so when you look at your own situation, you're thinking, oh, well, it's not as bad as that, or he or she has never done that to me, so it must not be that bad.
Absolutely. So a lot of times we see in the media, and in school, I'm studying, legal issues and criminology and things like that. So we see the more gory stories definitely lead. And so when we see those on the news, we say, oh, well, if mine's not that bad, he didn't threaten to kill me, or she didn't, hit me with a pan, or anything that's more on the severe side of things, we tend to say, well, it's not that bad. That's not going to happen to me. He was just angry, or she was just in a mood. And so what happens is then once one thing happens, it's going to continue on. And even if, it hasn't been that severe yet, it definitely is going to lead in that direction. Abuse is a pattern, and it's very systematic, and it's very manipulative. And so, 99% of the time, things are going to increase. And so when you look at yourself and your relationships, or you look at your friends' relationships, knowing that just because it's not as severe doesn't mean it's not as damaging emotionally. So understanding that even if your hurt is not at the grand scale of things we see on the news, it's still violence, it's still abuse. And we have seen that someone who, is being belittled and demeaned every day is struggling with the same things that someone who was beaten and bruised is struggling with every day. And it's that concept, and self-esteem plays into it, and your confidence is knocked so much down because you've been treated poorly for so long. And so knowing that if you feel that there's an issue, always go with your gut. If you think something's off, it probably is off. And that's when, if you can't see it for yourself, maybe make sure you're listening to those people in your life that love you, and knowing that abuse doesn't have to be on a grand scale of severity and, crazy things that we see televised. It can be very small, but if those small things continue, it is going to get larger.
Yeah, and I think, the majority of people who experience domestic violence will never go to a shelter. They
Absolutely.
will never talk to a cop. They may never ever even confide in friends and family. They may be able to go stay at their sister's house, or they may be able to do any number of things.
Mhm.
And so, it doesn't always look like the woman fleeing in the middle of the night to go to a shelter.
Absolutely. We see a lot of times that even getting them to the shelter, sometimes it's, please come on, we can do this. We're going to do this together. Because what people sometimes forget is that you are uprooting your entire life. If your kids are in school, you are moving schools. If you have a job, you are changing jobs, if they know where that job is at, and you are changing everything that is your normal. And so even when you leave a domestic violence relationship and you don't go to a shelter, you're still making a very dramatic change in your life.
Yeah. Westminster is a very small community. We're fortunate that we have exceptional students, exceptional faculty and staff, but we are an intimate community. People know each other, people are connected with each other, and because of that, sometimes people know your business. Can you kind of speak to the struggles with anonymity
Yeah.
and the feeling of like community judgment around that?
Yes. So I am from what I think is a decently small area. I'm about 45 minutes south of St. Louis, and it's pretty, most people know people, and if you see people out, you'll know them. And so when my mom's, story broke, or for say, when people started finding out what was going on, it was very overwhelming because we heard some comments of, well, why did she say it's, her own fault and things like that. And as a child, number one, that's hard to take in, saying, oh my gosh, I don't have a mom, and people are standing over here saying it's my mom's fault I don't have a mom. And so realizing that there is no judgment in leaving abuse, there is nothing better you can do for yourself than get out of that situation. And while people will always have opinions, that those opinions do not dictate the truth. And, while it is hard to deal with people like that, and it is absolutely not right in any circumstance, but knowing that whenever you're leaving for yourself. And so those people probably have no understanding, or very little, of domestic violence and how it works. And knowing that not everyone is ready to know about domestic violence and how it works, because it touches a lot of homes and it touches a lot of people, and kind of opening that can of worms could change a lot of people's lives. But in a small community like that, it's a two-way street of, that's wonderful because you know people who can help you, but you also know that the judgment's going to go around very quickly because everyone's going to find out. And just because, in this situation I've seen happen recently, is that just because you know someone and you love someone, that doesn't mean they're not abusive. And so you could know someone and they can be your best friend for 5 years, and when someone comes to you and say they're abusing me, you don't get to decide if they are or not. Your job is simply to be a support and say, let me get you resources, and go from there.
Thank you. I love this point, because just as we know survivors and victims in our life, we love and know abusers in our life as well. They are
Absolutely.
dynamic people. They're our fathers, our sisters, our friends, people that we really love and care about too. So that makes it complicated.
Absolutely. And there's no, just like there's no mold of a victim, there's no mold of an abuser. For a long time there was this, stereotype that it's a guy and he's big and he's buff and he's this old, and that's not what it is. Women can be abusers. Anyone can be an abuser. And so the thought that you don't know one is just, it's not correct. And I'm sure that's not a great thought to have. And I would hate to think in my own life that, oh my goodness, I know someone who's being abusive. But in that same breath, opening our eyes to the fact that just as we probably know victims, we also know the people who are perpetrating that.
Thank you. There's about 5 minutes left. I want to be sure if there's anybody who wants to jump in with a question, to put it in chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. Give just kind of a second before I have another question. Okay. My question to you was sort of the change in our world with COVID, and the fact that there are so many more people in quarantine, in isolation at home. On our own campus, we have people in quarantine and isolation. And what are some different ways we can advocate for people who are being affected by this as well?
Absolutely. So we've seen in the county I live in a 43% increase in domestic violence calls since the pandemic has started in March. And so realizing that people are cooped up, and that probably means they're cooped up with their abuser. So typically there is this free period where an abuser's at work or you're at the store, things of this nature that give you kind of an escape. That escape is gone. So the best way to show support first off is to, as someone who works in the field, is to make sure I'm pushing out things on my Facebook page, on my Instagram, that, we're still here to help. Advocates didn't go anywhere. We're here. We're ready to answer your calls. We're happy to safety plan with you and things like that. Excuse me. So people know resources are still available. So the shelter has been open through this pandemic. We have been working. Nothing has really changed on our end there. But it's also knowing that it's a little harder to get them out right now, because where are you going to go? Because a lot of people aren't going to feel safe going to a hotel or things like that nature. So making sure that if you can't help them physically, you're helping them emotionally. And just make sure the biggest thing that people are looking for is for you to say, I'm with you. I'm here for you. We are going through this together. You're not alone. And so being able to say that and to make sure that people know you are a person of that kind of character is really important.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to emphasize that, at Westminster, we have a number of services that can be helpful to you or your friends. We have, of course, our counseling services, our Center for Faith and Service. We have the work that I'm doing with Every Blue Jay. There are a lot of opportunities for you to come forward if you're comfortable. No one has to know if you want to come forward. There's a lot of opportunities to report something if you need to report something. So although this may feel isolating and then further isolation with the pandemic, just like Alexis is there, we're here too. So feel free to reach out. It looks like we have time for one more question. April is saying, what advice do you have for abuse victims who have been out of that toxic relationship for some time, but are still affected by it?
I definitely always recommend ongoing therapy and counseling, especially with someone who is specialized and trained in domestic violence or sexual assault, trained with victims of that. It's definitely an ongoing thing. And there's people that I've seen even in my own life, this happened 10 years ago, and I still struggle with different things today. So knowing that while you might be out of that situation emotionally and mentally, it's going to take a lot of time to heal, and there's no time limit on healing. And so making sure that you're staying connected with people who love and respect your boundaries, making sure you're setting those healthy boundaries for yourself of, this is what I, am happy to accept, and this is what I will not tolerate, and making sure you are just knowing that you're moving forward. And that is the best thing you can do, is to continue to move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexis. I can't thank you enough. Having the strength and the willingness to share your mother with us and share your family with us, and then the amazing work that you're doing in your community. I'm so appreciative of you being here. I know that you have contact information. Are you comfortable with people reaching out?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, great. And for anybody who would like to reach out to the college, feel free to contact me or anybody, really anybody on campus, and we'll get you set up too. So any last words, Alexis?
I think that's it. Just know that you are worthy of a healthy relationship, and if you ever need anything, just reach out.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, you guys. It was nice to see all of you.